No one told me about that. I'm going to tell you in just a little bit, but hold on. First of all, you saw the video. Again, I just wanted to remind you, because I don't know if anybody got to hear, but it's actually about a good summer camp for those going into 9th grade through 12th grade. The brochures are up here. $50 deposit by the end of the month will hold your spot, so make sure you get that in by May 31st, so that way we know that you're going, and we can save a seat for you, because seats are important. And you'll want to see when you go on camp, so make sure that you help us to know about that, so get your money if you're interested in being a part of that. Also, if you're graduating senior this year, please see us. We have information up here on how you can be part of. May 31st, we're going to have a senior spectacular. Every year we honor the graduating seniors, and so if you want to be part of that, we'd love for you to join in with us. So make sure you come by and see us after the service. Make sure you get that form. So there we go. All right, hey, today we're going to be talking a little about chairs. As you can see, we got some great looking chairs up here, and they've got a purpose. You know, you're not going to have to sit up here. Some of you look really worried right now. He's like, he's going to get me up there, right? And he's got it right there at the edge. It looks really dangerous, and no, nobody's going to have to do that. But you will be sitting in one of these chairs before the day's out. And chances are, maybe, hopefully, prayerfully, you might even move chairs. You may even choose to, like in musical chairs, go to another seat. And if that happens, then mission accomplished. Because tonight I want to share with you, today I want to share with you a message that I heard as a young person a long time ago, and it kind of impacted my heart, and I thought if I ever had a chance to share, I'd love to be able to do that. And so this is that message. And Bruce Wilkinson, back in the 80s, he started doing a thing called Walk Through the Bible. I don't know if you've ever been to a Walk Through the Bible conference, seminar. If you've never had a chance to do that, you really need to do it, because if you have the chance to, you're going to understand the scriptures so much better. They walk through Genesis all the way through Revelation, and you really get an understanding of how it goes. There's some fun ways to remember some of the books and their purposes and all that. So, but Bruce Wilkinson did that. He did the book Prayer of Jabez, and that's the book. If you've heard that one, that's Bruce Wilkinson as well too. But in this book, the booklet that he put together is called The Three Chairs, and it's based on this concept that he found in the Old Testament that there are basically three different chairs that constantly we found a pattern would go over and over again throughout Scripture, and maybe you've noticed it. And we'll talk about what that pattern is in just a moment. But I want to tell you the importance of chairs. Again, if you're going to camp, you want us to save you a seat. If you're coming to church, someone says, hey, save me a seat. You know, I'm going to be there, save me a seat. It's kind of important to have that. It's important to be connected, have that place where you fit, where you get to sit. And as a youth pastor, I try to get involved in students' lives. And many years ago, in fact, it's a little bit different than today. It's a lot stricter, really strict on campuses now. If you want to go see a student at lunch, that was kind of a thing that we like to do, and you can still do it. It's just kind of hard now, because basically, if you have to sign, you have to call ahead, you have to sign in, you check in, you have to buzz in, you have to sign up, get a badge, and then you go to a room. The students can't even have lunch with you in the lunchroom. They gotta have to go to a special room. Most of the schools are doing that now. It's just all about safety and not causing the disruption, and you know how youth pastors can be. So it's just kind of a safety thing they've done, and so it makes it a little more difficult. But back in the day, you didn't have to do it quite as much as that. And so my friends were like, some of the students in my youth group were like, hey, come meet our friends at lunch if you would do that. Come join us, and we'll have lunch together, and I'll introduce you to some of our friends, and then that way they can kind of maybe come to youth group somewhere down the road as well. And so that was a great idea. So I went to make plans to go, and I came in the lunchroom. I was early, and they come marching in, and I noticed these students of mine started sitting down in their seats where they were, you know, kind of they looked pretty comfortable. And kind of sat down there. One of my students sat here, another one sat there. Then some other kids were sitting around them that I didn't know, but that was kind of the point. We're going to get to meet them and stuff. So it was going to be a real good thing. And so as they all sat around there, now the decision comes to my mind, like, what do I do? I'm not a student. You know, I'm not going to pass for one. I'm not going to try to be one. But obviously, I don't know the drill here, so I'm trying to figure out, you know, what I say next is going to be pretty important. It's like, where do I sit? And so I didn't ask. I just decided I would sit here, because I figured it's close enough to those guys without cramping their style. But yet, you know, far enough away where I won't bother them, but I'll be close enough to still have the conversation. So I would move my way over, and I have this seat. I sit down in that chair, and as I sit in that chair, Jesse, one of my students, looks at me like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm sitting down. Is it a trick question? It's kind of obvious. I'm sitting down. He's like, do you understand you can't sit there? I'm like, I didn't see a sign. I wasn't really aware that you could or couldn't sit here. He's like, you don't understand. Jack sits there. That's where he sits every day. I'm like, well, I'm very sorry. I didn't know that. You know, he's like, now you do. And so, you know, I realized that sometimes there are chairs that we're supposed to sit in, and chairs we're not supposed to sit in. And maybe today you'll find out which chair you're not supposed to be sitting in as well, too. we're going to notice through the Old Testament, there's some patterns here that kind of take place that maybe will help you to see that where you're at today. And my guess is you're in one of these chairs right now and you're wondering where it is. I'm going to get right to that right away. The chairs, we would call them, we call this one commitment. We would call this one compromise. We would call this one conflict. So that one's a commitment to God. This one's maybe a compromise with God. And this one's where you're kind of conflicted with God. And we'll kind of get some examples of how that took place. We notice in the Old Testament that it takes place in different places. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We'll notice that father, son, and son. You'll notice the pattern there that they kind of found themselves seated in these seats. And Abraham, we find it is the man that would be described as the friend of God. He's God's friend. When people think of Abraham, you know, even as a kid, you sing the song, Father Abraham and many sons, you know, and you know all about the Christian faith and the Judean faith. They all look back to Father Abraham. He's kind of the guy who where everything would be blessed around him. And he was such a man of God, to follow God. He had such a passion for God that so much of the faith was built around that. When they talk about the fathers of the faith, you know, it's Abraham. It all starts right there because of his love for God. And you all know the story of having his son Isaac, at 100 years old, and then when God asked him to bring him up on the altar and to offer him, and he was willing to bring him up there, that Abraham was a man of worship, because that was the act of God that God was asking him to do. He was willing to follow through with that because he loved God more than the things of this world, more than even his own family. He was willing to give the one thing that God gave him back to God, and he was willing to obey. And so his act of worship in an altar always involves worship. And so he is a man of worship. He's a man you would say is a friend of God. Now Isaac, on the other hand, is one who experienced all that, saw all this, but you know he kind of inherited his faith. Maybe you've seen that or kind of heard about that concept where, you know, my parents, they're really serious about God. I'm not so sure where I stand. You've heard that kind of thinking. Or, you know, you watch somebody who follows in that faith and they're just not sure where they want, how much of that they want to follow in. So Isaac is that person. And as he follows and notices what he's going to do in his life, he is the one who basically wants to make everybody happy. It is his goal to have peace at any price. And so when he's negotiating with other nations around him, he's trying to find out a way where it can make everybody happy. So he was willing to compromise even what God's told him to do, to the place where that way somehow people would not be offended. And so, you know, he loves God. It's not that he doesn't. It's just that he also cares about what people think as well, too. Unlike his father, who would notice if Lot's going to go this way, I'm willing to go wherever God wants me to do. And so he's willing to follow him. So you have Abraham, you have Jacob, Isaac, and then Jacob, his son. Jacob, you kind of remember from the very beginning, Jacob and Esau were already fighting. They were scheming, they were plotting, they were planning, they were always in fact, they were fighting from the day they were born. And so Jacob already understands that concept where he wants what he wants, and he's going to get what he wants. And in fact, if you remember the story, right, he's the great cook. He's making this great stew. Esau comes in from working hard, and he comes in and says, "I'm so hungry." He's like, "Hey, give me your birthright. Can I have some?" "I'm so hungry." So he takes this stew, and some of us are that hungry, like, "Oh man, don't bring up food right now. We're still hungry this morning." And so he says, you know, I'm willing to make that deal. And so he schemes a plan there so he can get what he wants. And so Jacob was very good at that. Jacob's goal was to make sure he took care of himself. We would say that Abraham was a friend of God. We would say that Isaac wanted peace at any price. We would say Jacob was maybe more of a schemer, kind of find a way to get what he needed. Where Abraham's goal was to worship. That was what his life was about. His idea was, how can I best glorify God with what I'm doing? Where Isaac was about his work. He was advancing. He's very diplomatic. That would be a good way to describe it. And so about what he do to make the best of his work. Where Jacob was more about his wealth. What can I have? What can I gain from this? You can see how the progression of the chairs. We move on. The priorities for Abraham was God. He was a friend of God. It was his most important thing. Where Isaac was about me and God. You know, I love God, but I also love me, you know, so how can I best do this to best glorify God and get something out of it too? Where by the time he got to Jacob, it was more about me, you know, it was more about himself, and what can I do that best glorifies me, you know, what can I do, what's in it for me? In other words, I don't hear you, Pastor, you're speaking, but I hear anything for it, and what's in it for me? Until I hear that, I'm not really hearing you, and so that would have been Jacob at this point. And so we would ask the question in this situation where, you know, to kind of relate to our life, how important is worship to us? Is it literally, no pun intended, the high point of your week? Some of you will get that later. Is worship the high point of your week? For Abraham, it was. It was the most important part of his life, and everything, and everybody that knew him knew that was the case. Where Isaac watched him, and it was important, and he learned from him, but it wasn't what he drove for. I mean, he did a lot of good things, but then, it wasn't as clear as it was for Abraham. By the time it got to Jacob, it wasn't as clear. Worship wasn't as important. So we have to ask that question. And then the next question would be, especially as we talk about careers and importance and goals and passions, what you do with your life, how does it glorify God? And what is it that you do with your life, and how can you use that for God? Obviously with Abraham, everything he did, he tried to bring it back to being able to use for God. With Isaac, he was trying to find a way as long as it would work out for everybody else. He didn't want to offend anyone, but he also made sure that it was taken care of with God at times as well too, where Jacob, it didn't matter as much. And so we would ask that question, do we use things to win people, or do we use people to win things? It's kind of a turnaround on that. So in this chair, we would say we would use everything we have. We leverage all that we own. We saw it a couple weeks ago at the auction. So many people brought in things, so many people bought things, just so we could get kids on a mission trip. We use things to win people. And we still haven't done the winning yet. That's just winning people to get them on the field. So there's so much win there because we're using things to win people, where by the time you get to this seat, it's about how can you use people to win things, And you know that person where it's like, hey, by the way, can I talk to you? I got this business. Not that there's anything wrong with that business, but you wonder if the friendship is as important as the business. And so, by the time it gets here, it's a question mark there. So you see this with this generation. And so if you're in seat number one, that's closest to God, here you're kind of on the border, sometimes not, and over here you're a little bit farther away. In Revelation, you hear that said, where it's like, he says, I have one thing against you, that you've lost your first love. In other words, maybe at one time you were sitting in seat number one, but you've moved away. And the question is, how do we get back to number one? Another example would be if we look at Joshua, the elders, and the period of the judges. We go to the end of the book of Joshua. Now, if you love the book of action, Joshua is the place to go, because there's so much action. He's the military leader who Moses has appointed to go and to conquer the land. And so Joshua is the man, and if they made a movie today of him, it would be Rambo. He's that guy. He's the one that can make it happen. He's going to win at all costs, but he has a passion and a purpose for that. He wants to glorify God. And so from being mentored under Moses, first-hand relationship with God. That's what Joshua has. It's his first-hand experience, too, because even the very first battle, as they walk into Jericho, the battle is not even his. It's like, okay, here's how we're going to fight. And God says, no, you're not. You're going to march around the city 7 times and blow your trumpet and shout. And Joshua's going, yes, sir, Lord, I'll follow you. It makes no sense. I'm a military leader. I know what I'm doing. But nevertheless, because I want to serve you, God, I will sit in seat number one, and I'll do what you ask me to do. And he got the victory. And as you read through the book of Joshua, you'll see time and time again that Joshua saw God's hand in his life, because he had such a personal relationship with him. He relied on his every step, and he had the victory. And he did everything that God had wanted to accomplish for the land of Israel, for the people of Israel, as they had the chance to conquer the land. So he had a first-hand experience, and we see that in Joshua 24:15, the classic verse where you come to the end there where he's talking, and he says, you can do what you want to do, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You've seen the sign somewhere before, haven't you? And that's Joshua who says at the end of his life, he says, make it clear. If you didn't understand before, I want to make it very clear, I'm in seat number one. No doubt. Jesus is number one. I'm following God. That's everything I want to do. Now he hands off, a couple verses later, you'll see in verse 31 that he hands it off to the elders. The elders are saying, as we will too. In other words, it's in here, okay? What Joshua did, we want to do too, so ditto, But sometimes ditto is not the same as me, or I declare, or I want this. And so that's kind of what's happened here. They're inheriting this faith. They watch Joshua do these incredible things. They totally agree with him. They believe him and follow what he's doing. It's just that it's not become personal for them. And as the time would go on, it would show that they didn't have the same power in their life. They didn't have the same relationship with God. They didn't see the same kind of victories that Joshua had because they didn't have the same kind of relationship with God. You and I both all the time are trying to find and serve God and do something that's incredible for him, but it seems powerless. It's because we don't have that relationship. We're here where we agree with God, we love God, and we actually follow the people of God. But we don't have the power of God in our life because we're seated here where we're not with that relationship with God. That's not where they were. It's like, Everything Joshua did, we want to do too. We want to continue that. We believe in God. Doctrinally, we line up with Him perfectly. It's just that it's not ours. They've never come to a place where they made it their own personal relationship. And of course, by Judges, things have changed quite a bit. There's a reason why they needed judges, and it's because the people went a little crazy. They started doing things that were away from God. They were going away from God. It was no longer the same. They didn't have the experience with God that Joshua had, or the pseudo experience that the elders had. By this time, it was about themselves, and they were far away from God, and they were doing their own thing. We see here that Joshua had convictions. You know, if you're going to stand up and for all these people and you're going to fight for your land, you better know that you believe in what you're doing. You have to have convictions. It's not just hey, this is an idea, let's go out and win this battle, you know. You have to have total conviction or you will never win. So he has total convictions. Now the elders have great beliefs. They follow, they understand, they believe all the things. They just don't, it's not convictions yet. You know, you can have it here but not here. That's kind of what's going on. They're totally in, they just haven't brought in with their whole heart. And so it goes on there. By this time now, the people have come to a place where it's their opinion. We want this. Why don't we have a king? Everybody else has a king. We want, I, me, we. And it changed from what was most important in following God. So things had kind of changed at that point. Now in seat number 1, Joshua was taking bold risks. He was willing to do whatever God asked him to do. He did the craziest, wildest things because it made no sense to anybody else, but he was following God's heart and willing to not compromise on that. We get compromised in second seat because by this time they were willing to take some risks, but not the same kind. You know, they were the kind that this is smart. Okay, here we're going to do something for God, but it's not going to cost us a lot. We're going to be smart about this, all right? So here we go, God. Here's for you, and here's some for us, and we're working together. And I'm going to glorify you. So not doing anything wrong, just not all in. You can see the pattern here that's going on. And of course, by the time we get to the judges, it's not the case anymore. Because at this point, they're not taking any risks at all. And they're not trying to serve God by this point. By this point, they hear the stories, and they're like, here we go again, no sermon. You know, but it wasn't theirs. It wasn't important to them. It hadn't got to the place where it was real. It was somebody else's story. And so what happens here, how do we get people, you realize there's people in our life that are watching us. And I don't know what seat you're in today, but there are people watching. Chances are, in leadership, you always have to go a step farther than what you want the people to go with you, all right? So, like, if you're going to lead a song, and those who led songs up here know, you have to sing louder and more clearly, and you have to go for notes that somebody else will never try, you know, because you want them to follow you, but if you won't go for it, nobody else will too. Leadership is always that way. So, wherever you're at in your life right now, there's people following you, whether you're a parent, whether you're a supervisor at work, whether you're a leader of a Cub Scout group, whatever it is that you do, you got people following you. You have to ask the questions, how do I get them to get closer to God? Well, chances are, if you're in this seat and you're at a place of compromise where it's like, hey, yeah, I love God, people know that, and stuff like that, but they also see you cheat on this, and your language is something else, and music you listen to doesn't glorify God at all. You're like, okay, so you love God, you can do whatever you want too. Okay, so guess what? Your people are following you are seated here. They're not coming here because you're there. They're sitting here because it's like, okay, well, that's what leaders do, so I don't have to be a leader. I'm not following, so I'm following behind, so they're going to sit here. So if you're looking at the people following, you're like, why don't we get it? Because maybe it's because we're not where we're supposed to be. You see, if we're here in a compromised state, we're never going to get somebody else to go past us. Water doesn't rise above its own level. And so if we want that to happen, we have to move over here. And you say, well, I am over here. And then you check your life, and maybe we can make a step, get back over here. Perhaps you're like a lot of us, where we were in seat number 1, and it was great, we're having a great time, and somehow we just stopped, being as committed. And something changed. It wasn't as important to us. It's a nice day. Maybe we won't go to church this week. You know what? We really have that big bill right now, so we're not tithing this month. We're just going to stop some of the little things. We used to invite people over and stuff, but we're really busy now. It's not hard to do that anymore. So you start compromising. You feel like you're still here because in your heart you still love God, just like the elders. I believe everything Joshua believes. Everything that pastor says up there, I totally agree. You're just not doing it. Our heart's different. We're compromising. So I agree here, I'm acting like this over here. But I agree here, I'm acting like this over here. And so we're in compromise. So if you want the people following you to move over, you've got to move over. So if you want to get them to this place, you've got to scoot back over to here where it's clear and obvious. Maybe you're even here, but maybe nobody knows it. In other words, your secret's like, my relationship with God, it's kind of personal. Well, that's good, but how about making it so it's public too? Because the personal is cool, but once you make it public, it affects other lives. Let me share with you this statement. Write this one down. You want this? It says this: the legacy you leave is more important than the heritage you receive. I'll say that again. The legacy that you leave behind you, the people following you, the legacy you leave is far more important than the heritage you receive. Now you see, all of us can say, well, Pastor Scott, you don't know what it's like for me. I got this, or I have this. I work at this place where they cuss all day, and so, they play this music all day, and they talk about this, and what they do on the weekends, and all this stuff. And so it's really hard for me, so I'm lucky to even be here. So you should just, the heritage we receive, the place where we're at, is not as important as the legacy we leave. So if you're here, guess where the people following you? Do they even get a chair? We want to leave a legacy. That's far more important than whatever we receive. I grew up in an alcoholic home. I couldn't go there for a long time. Just to remind you, though, that people would come and tell me, they'd say, hey, Scotty, we don't understand why you even come to church. We know you don't have to come. We know you get in trouble when you come. I literally would get in trouble for coming to church because, it's like, oh, man, you're going to that place again. I don't know if those of you are first-generation Christians, you know what I'm talking about. If you chose to live for God out of a family that doesn't, this is the kind of stuff you get. Like, really, going to that church, you go there all the time. I hope you're not giving your money there too, because you're not paying your bills, and by the way, your car needs this, stuff. And so that was the kind of stuff that I would get. So it'd been so easy for me to say, you know what, seat number 3. It'd be so easy. So that was my heritage, but you know what, I can't use that heritage as an excuse, and nor can you. Because we know that we can have a relationship with Christ, and once we have this information, number one, we're dangerous. It's going to be so amazing what God can do in your life. But number two, we're responsible too. Because now we know that we can have a vibrant, real relationship with God. And so we want to say, well, but you don't know how bad it is for me, but you have to throw those excuses away because the heritage we receive is not near as important as the legacy we leave behind us. You see? We want so bad to make the people in our lives to want to have the same thing we have. I see parents all the time like, I don't know why. I'm trying to get my kid to come to church. They just don't want to come or anything like that. And stuff, but we're sitting in this seat. Oh, wait a minute, this seat. But you're wanting your kid to come and do this. It's not going to happen. Never will. You can even be in this seat, and your kid may still choose to be over here. I'm going to give you an example of that in a little bit. But you always have to be farther on where you want the people in your life to follow you, whether it's at work, your family. So here's a couple of things. You need to talk about your faith with those people that follow you, whether it's, again, your neighbors, your friends, your family, your coworkers, whatever it is. You need to actually have conversations about the great things in God. When was the last time you actually said, I just have to share it with you. God just blew me away this past weekend. You say, I can't do that at work. I'm not allowed to do that. Okay. Well, next time somebody says, hey, so what'd you do this last weekend? Oh, it's on now. You just asked, right? And so then you have a conversation, say, well, I went to church, I heard this message, and you did this, and it's kind of cool. And so you have a chance to praise God, and you give those opportunities to lift up His name. But on the same hand, also be honest, too. Because I think they all think that when we're Christians and we get to this place that we don't ever have any struggles. And it's like, well, it's okay for you because you live over there. You should sit in my seat and go, you know what? Over here I got problems, too. So you talk honestly. You know what? I'm struggling right now. This is so hard. I don't know how we're going to pay our bills this week. I've tried so hard and nothing's working out. You know what? I'm praying about it. And you talk to honest struggles and they go, oh, so you're like a real person still, So you understand what it's like. And so when you have those honest conversations, people can see, well, maybe I'd like to get a little closer. What you're saying is starting to make sense to me instead of being so far apart from that. So we have that conversation, especially with our kids. They see us all the time. They know when we struggle. They know that we don't always have it together. So let's just be honest about it and say, you know what, this is hard. And this is where I'm at, but this is what I want to be. This is how God is blessing my life. My kids obviously grew up in the ministry, didn't have a choice. They were always the first there, the last to leave. You heard the story before. But so there came a point when they were actually old enough to be in my youth group. Now I've noticed that most of my friends who have been youth pastors, that somehow, maybe it was divine, or maybe it was, I'm sure it was divine, but by the time that they were becoming, their kids were coming into youth group, they also moved on to other ministries. And so you have their kids in youth group, and so that was actually kind of that saved them a potential conflict, because you're like, how are you supposed to be the youth pastor to your kids when you're also the parents to your kid? That's a trick. And so for years, Melinda and I were doing studies and trying to figure out and learn from other parents, especially those parents of students who had students in their ministry. So as my kids were coming up, we had to be honest about a couple of things and say, you know what? When you walk into youth group, this is the deal we're going to have for you. When you walk in that door, and it's youth group, and it's church, at that moment, you're no longer my son. You're no longer my daughter. And they're like, what? No, you still are my daughter, but just a time out. For that time being, you are now a student in the youth group just like everyone else. I'm not going to expect any more from you than anybody else in this group. Now, you may excel some more, you may choose to follow and be a leader and all those different things, but when you come in, you get to be just like every other student. I need you to find your own faith. You can't have my faith. I can't let you inherit from me, just like the elders did from Joshua. I want you to have seat number one. And that also means, too, I'm not going to let you get away with stuff that other kids aren't allowed to get away with either. So you're treated just like a student. But when you walk out those doors, you're my baby. Everything's back on. But for that time being, it's your time to find your faith. And if you want me, I'm here, but I'm not looking you down because I know you got to have some space. you need to find your own faith. And so for 6 to 8 years, we had to kind of work through that and try to figure out how to do that. Back to the place where I even told my kids, I said, you know what? If you feel like when you come to church, you can't find your own faith, you feel like it's like, oh, I'm expected to be here because my mom and dad are there on staff, and so I gotta be a good kid. And I didn't want them to be this person or worse, this person. You know, I wanted them to have their own faith. And so we actually had to get to the place where we said, you know what? If it's too crowded in here for us and you, obviously I can't go anywhere else. I have to be in this youth group setting. But if you need to be in another youth group, you have that right. I want you to. Having you in my youth group is not near as important as you having the chance to sit in seat number one. And so we have to give our kids a chance to be able to explore their own faith, to fail in their own faith, you know, to struggle, to ask the hard questions. Like I said, oh, just pray about it. Or here's a Bible verse, you know, it's like, well, Mom, I'm just struggling. Dad, it's just hard. Can I just say that? We need to sit down and go, you know what, it is hard. Let's cry over that. You know, and be honest about it instead of just like, no, we'll get it. Because that's what happened. These people are like, okay, we have to just get it. They're not dealing with the real issues though, because it wasn't a relationship yet. So we learn from that, and we should go. That's why we talk about mission trips and camp, because that's that chance for your kids get a chance to go, guess what I found? It's so amazing. Mom, Dad, sit down and listen. You're not going to believe what God just blew me away. It was the best week ever. And they're going to tell you why, because it was their experience. We can't pass it on and say, okay, here's what you need. Put a little badge on their shoulder, and they walk out going, I'm a Christian. You know, it doesn't work that way. They've got to find it themselves for it to be seat number one. And so we've got to give them that chance to do that. And the people in our lives do that as well. So finally, a couple more examples. David, Solomon, and Rehoboam. David is a man after God's own heart. We've heard that over and over again. Of course, he sins, he really messes up, he does horrible things, and he gets it right with God. And his goal is to please God with his life. He asks the question, what does God think? He continues to ask that question, even in his failure and his successes. And he was the man of worship. He wrote over half the Psalms, and so you can see his heart for worship is clear. Now, Solomon, he had a chance to do some great things for God. He asked for God, instead of asking for a passion for God, he asked for wisdom. And God gave him wisdom. There's nothing wrong with wisdom, right? But it's a typical seat number two kind of thing. Because wisdom's a good tool. It's not necessarily passion for God. It can be used to glorify God. But he asked for something that can be used both ways. And so his wisdom, for the longest time in his life, glorified God. But there's a place where it started glorifying himself more than it did others. In fact, the passage you find here in 1 Kings 11, it talks that he was the wisest man alive, then he was the richest man alive. He was literally the most popular man alive. He had 700 wives, 300 concubines, 1,000 women in his life, and literally kings would come from all over the world. They would come and sit at his feet just to listen to him talk, so that they could impart some kind of wisdom. So he was that man who was in seat number one, but quickly got to seat number two, because at half the time it was for God, and other times it was about himself. And by the time you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you can see that he really falls into some depression, because he kind of missed it. It says their life is vanity, vanity, all things is vanity. Kansas would describe it as dust in the wind, if you've heard that song. That's the book of Ecclesiastes. That's Solomon, who tasted both sides. He's a good compromiser. And then finally, we see Rehoboam, that's Solomon's son. By this time, he had seen enough. He was done. In fact, he's trying to take out his dad now. He's getting a team of an army together to be able to win over the throne, because where David was all about building the temple. His dream was that one day he would build a temple. Solomon wanted to build a palace, so it would bring all kinds of attention and glory. He was definitely full of pride. By the time he got to Rehoboam, it was about building an empire. He wanted to rule the world because he had enough already by the time he got to this place. We could go on and on. There are examples over and over in Scripture. And while I'm sharing these, no doubt your mind's already gone there, hasn't it? You're thinking of a situation either in your family, a friend's family, a neighbor, something like that, where you're like, that's right, that's so true. I know these first-generation Christians, and their kids are kind of in there, and they do all the right things. They're good kids, but not necessarily as crazy as the first generation. And then by the time he gets to here, who knows? And it doesn't have to be this way. This is just the way humankind transpires, because gravity takes over. You know, we start here and gravity wins. Unless we do something to go back up the stairs, we will all fall down the stairs. And that's why we have the chance to make some decisions today. If you're in seat number one, the question would be, here's the challenge before you. If you're in seat number one, be careful, because it's so easy to get out of that chair. I mean, that's a great place to be, and that's the goal, to be in seat number one, to where you have a direct relationship with God. He is ruling your checkbook. He's ruling your schedule. He's the one that helps you make the decisions in your life. He's first place in your life. The question here would be, are you willing to recommit that day in and day out? Because, and this quick, you could be in seat number two. Because most of the time we don't even realize we got to seat number 2. We just start making decisions, we're compromising, we don't realize we're compromising. You know, we were committed, now we're compromising, because it's like, well, you know what, God don't understand. Have you ever said that one? Ooh, you know, well, let's find out what God actually says before we say what God will do, because, you know, let God be the judge of that. And so, you know, in this seat, you're in a place where you should maybe reevaluate. In other words, are you really serving God, or is this a good thing to do? Hey, this is still better than here, right? So we're thankful for that. We're thankful you still believe the truth, you're still following the truth, all that stuff. But what can you do to get your heart back right here? And you know, you want your kids to be there too, so what can you do to help your kids and the people that are following you to get to that spot? And if you're in this seat, there's only one thing you can do, is repent. Because being away from God will never bring the happiness that you're striving for. Whatever it is that you're doing in your life right now that you think is going to bring you the joy and the satisfaction, it's never ever going to work. And you've got to repent from that, whether it's pride, selfishness, greed. You can list those on and on. There's so many different ways to get away from God. The devil doesn't care. All he needs is one to get you away. As long as you're here, he doesn't care. And so if he's got you there, the first place to get anywhere is to repent. You have to come to a place where you realize, you know what, this is not right. And so I need to get back to what God has. And the cool thing is, you don't have to kind of go here to here. You know, right to first base. You know, go right over here, because when you repent, God has been waiting for you, and he doesn't go, okay, well, we're going to put you on a 30-day trial and see if you're serious about this commitment thing, so let's we'll come back to you in 30 days. And it's like, the moment you come back, read Luke chapter 15, when the prodigal repents and he comes back to his father, what's his dad do? I knew you'd be back. He doesn't say that at all. As he comes back, it's like he runs to him, he meets him, he hugs him and says, let's party and celebrate, for you are back home in first seat again. So none of us have any reason for not being here today. Bow your head and close your eyes as we wrap up today. As we're finishing up here, I want to